right, welcome everyone. This is our first lecture, and this is our first lesson on classification in biology. You can plainly call it classification. You can also call it taxonomy. So it is a very wide topic, and we'll have a number of lessons looking at how we classify organisms. So these topics can be called classification biology, can be called taxonomy, can be called classification of organisms. You can call it a variety of names. Okay, so what are we going to look at in this topic? We basically know that biology is concerned with the study of living organisms. Or you can say biology is about studying the study of life. Okay, so therefore we have a number of living organisms. They can be living organisms staying in water. They can be living organisms staying on land. They can be living organisms that can be found anywhere, whether it is in water or in land. We have those that we can see and those that we cannot see. We have those that can make their own food. We have those that cannot make their own food. So you can see that we are actually very, very many organisms. So that means that it is very important for us to classify these organisms into groups, such that if we are studying them, we are looking at them in groups. Okay, because we know that if an organism A is similar to B, it means that what B does is what A does. So we don't have to study one organism and move to the other without grouping them. So it allows us to have order. Okay, order. It allows us to be very organized and orderly when we are looking at these organisms. So classification is defined as the systematic way of arranging organisms into categories based on their shared characteristics. Okay, systematic arrangement of organisms into categories based on their shared characteristics. Okay, so you can see the image that we have a number of organisms that we are having there, animals and plants, and others that we cannot see there, but still we need to classify them into different groups or categories based on what characteristics they possess. So we can use the word taxonomy to basically do the same thing. So if we have taxonomy as a word, it is the same as classification. Okay, taxonomy is the study of how organisms are classified based on their characteristics. These characteristics can be structural, behavioral, or physiological. Okay, that means that the characteristics are based on the things that we see, physical things that we see with our naked eyes or with the microscope. So those are physical characteristics. We can also call them structural characteristics. What structures do they have? And then how do they do certain activities? So that is the outward behavior, what we see them doing. That is behavior. Okay? What happens when the animal is on heat? What happens when the animal is being chased by a predator? Those are all behaviors. So we also look at their behavioral characteristics. We also look at how they carry out processes in their body. Okay? So that is what we call physiological characteristics. Physiological processes. How they obtain their food, how do they digest their food, how do they get the waste products removed out of their body. All those are physiological processes. How do they make certain molecules? How do they get their energy? That is ATP. All those are physiological characteristics. So we move from what we see, something very big, to something very small that we cannot see. Okay? So we move from a bigger picture to a smaller picture. The bigger picture is what you see, and then inside the cell, what you don't see, the physiological processes there. That is where they come in there. Okay? So when we the science of classifying all these organisms based upon their physical behavior and physiological or biochemical similarities is what we call taxonomy. So taxonomy has two branches. Nomenclature. If we talk about nomenclature, we basically mean naming something. Okay, so how do we name organisms scientifically? The biological nomenclature is about naming organisms, following the rules of nomenclature, okay, or following scientific rules or principles. And then systematics is about placing organisms into groups that we call the taxa. So taxa, we shall see these are groups. Okay, so placing the organism into, for example, what you should be familiar with is whether it is cold-blooded or not cold-blooded. Okay, whether it is the photosynthetic or it is not photosynthetic. Okay, placing the organism into those different groups that we can have is what we call systematics. So the taxa that we talked about is basically a plural of the word taxon. Okay, taxon is a group. Okay, a group. For example, we can say that we put ducks in one group, and then we put the rabbits in another group. Okay, what's the difference? Is that, okay, we are saying that those that have feathers go to this group, those that don't have feathers go to the other group, based on their similarities or differences. And we have already stressed that when we talk about similarities, we talk about similarities and differences, we are talking about things that we can see physically, and then things that we see them doing, that is behavior, and then how they carry out biological processes or physiological processes. These are the things that we look at. Okay? So a taxon is the unit of classification comprising of organisms of the same or similar features. So why do we need this classification, and why do we actually need to study it? Some of the reasons I actually mentioned them earlier on. If we have a way of grouping organisms, it creates order. Okay, we are able to be very, very organized in looking at these organisms. So if we are basically studying them, if you see an organism that has this, we are able to say that one is an animal that belongs to group X. Okay, so it becomes very easy. It's just like us having identity cards. The identity cards give us a lot of information about individuals. So we can either say he is a Kenyan, he is a Ugandan, or he is a South Sudanese because of this identity card. We know where we can place them because of these identity cards that we have. So it allows the identification of these organisms and we put in the right group. And then it also allows us to know the evolutionary history of these organisms. So the one here that I'm introducing, evolutionary history or evolutionary relationship, and then the word phylogeny. They mean the same. What do they mean actually? For an organism that you see now, its appearance is not what that organism perhaps used to appear. many years ago. Okay, many years ago. Okay, there have been changes. There have been changes that these organisms undergo. Even as humans, we have evolutionary changes. So by the time we put an organism in a particular group, it gives us a relationship with how it was some years back, evolutionary history. That's what we are talking about there. So it allows us to easily separate organisms, put them in their respective groups, creates order, there's no confusion, there's no chaos, and then it allows us to study. If we are going to study, for example, reptiles that you are familiar with, we just need to study the general characteristics of reptiles. We don't need to move from one example of reptile to another example of reptile. No. We say that reptiles are organisms that have these characteristics, and all the organisms that belong to that group will basically have those characteristics, unless we have exceptions. Okay, so it allows us to study these organisms properly. Okay, and then we also have the concept that we have organisms that emerge. Organisms come up. Organisms that were not there, then they come up. New species being formed. Okay, so if we have new species that have been formed, the process is called speciation. The process by which you have new species emerging is what we call speciation. So when we have new organisms emerging, we can be able to classify them. And so these ones belong to this. You are new, but you belong to this.